Failing to plan is planning to fail. Especially true in the realm of software. Stick around as we explore this concept and what organizations can do to better equip themselves when disaster strikes. When your system is working as intended, all is well. It's when the unexpected strikes and your team must pivot into recovery mode that you find out how prepared you really are. The concept of disaster recovery isn't new. It's existed for hundreds of years. Whether due to natural events or cybersecurity attacks, when disaster hits, you need to be prepared. Because failing to do so can lead to lost revenue and unhappy customers. So, what does a disaster recovery plan look like in the world of ERPs? How do you go about forming one? And what happens if you don't have one in place? Today on RPI Tech Connect, we're going to find out. Our special guest is none other than Senior Technical Consultant Siva Ramamurthy. Siva, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So happy to have you on the program. I know that this is a very important topic to you. So before we explore all that, I'd love to hear more about, your journey as a consultant and, your background. So what can you share with us?
Sure. Yeah. I'm a senior consultant, technical consultant at RPI, and I primarily work on CloudSuite implementation and support projects for multiple clients. I also do a lot of reporting projects using the spreadsheet server technology and other info reporting tools. I've been with the consulting world, since 1999. And I played various roles in the SDLC. So developer, tester, PM, you name it, I've done it. Started off as a developer in the Microsoft world, eventually becoming a full stack developer in the .NET and SQL Server technologies. Then I ended up doing more of architecture and design of custom applications. I've led multinational development teams and support teams in the past. I've also worked as a senior business system analyst, project manager, and a program manager in the healthcare, finance, and retail domains. In my previous job, I was a practice director for the Infor practice that had Lawson and InfoRLN capabilities and offerings. So I've seen a few things in my life. So,
just a couple there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sharing that with us. If you wouldn't mind explaining why disaster recovery is so important.
Sure. Yeah, I can start with basically defining what it is. Simply put, it's a plan of action that's already defined in detail and documented and tested, emphasis on tested, that are needed to be taken when an outage, application outage, in other words, disaster strikes an IT department or an application. What is a disaster? Disaster can be like a physical one, flood, maybe war, okay, or any cables getting disconnected and whatnot, right? As simple as that. Could be hardware failures, and then, as I said, power outages, environmental issues, rioting, and whatnot. Disasters can also strike because of software issues. We recently saw one with the CrowdStrike, right?
Yeah.
So that's also that could be a cause. Another major cause can be because of a cyber attack, which is becoming all the more common in recent years. So in short, any event that causes any disruption to your IT operations, normal IT operations, or a specific system would be considered as a disaster.
Yeah. So there's a number of different ways that disaster can manifest, and the way that it affects your systems. Obviously, you need to be prepared on how to address those concerns as they happen. And I'm sure, depending on the type of disaster, there's probably different protocols for responding to them. Would you agree with that?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, disaster recovery, it's this concept that's been around for a while, but I'm sure throughout the years and over time, especially as software has evolved, that there's been this evolution in what disaster recovery looks like. So, how has that evolved from your perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So, as you rightly pointed out in the beginning of the call, right, disaster recovery steps or planning has existed in one form or the other since a long time. And in the initial days of computers and servers, it could have been as simple as backing up your data right on a regular basis on a tape, then a floppy. I mean, those were the
Taking me
standard
back.
procedures. Yes, I know.
Taking me back to the early days.
Yeah. So people used to back it up and kind of label it and store it in a locker in the office, or put it in a floppy and all whatnot. And then came the CDs and the DVDs and whatnot. So those were the earlier days, and then people wanted to as technology grew. The DR planning and the infrastructure around that has also grown and kept up. Now we have concept like multi-location data centers. If one location goes down because of any reason, becomes inaccessible, you have other locations where your application is. Then you have a lot of redundancy, not only hardware and servers, but also in network and resources, IT resources who actually maintain this. You have concepts like the failover servers, right, that kick in as soon as there is a failover. This is far cry from the days when backups were being taken locally on a tape or a floppy disk. So we have come a long way, and we are still evolving. And technology is definitely, as the technology improves, as we have systems which are kind of linked over the internet and new concept coming, DR world is also kind of evolving and trying to keep up.
Yeah, sure. I definitely think there's been some development there from physically storing like data on a hard drive or paper documents in a file cabinet to now like in the cloud, for example, right? Like these multi-location data centers that you mentioned. Like there's fail safes that are in place that like when something goes down, like there's something else that you can fall back on. Is that right?
Yeah, in fact, there are systems where as soon as there is a failure, you have redundant systems that just come up, and for the end user, it's just seamless. In fact, it's almost 100% uptime. For the giant, say, e-commerce, providers and all, they cannot afford to be down for even a few seconds. It's loss of business. So there are systems which are almost 100% uptime. There's never 100%, like 99.9% or whatnot, but it's almost 100%. And the disaster recovery is seamless to the end.
They can't even tell when one thing goes down, the other comes up to support it.
That's right. Yes.
That's what you want too, right?
That's the ideal situation. But again, real life is far from ideal, as we saw recently. So,
yeah. So we're talking about disaster recovery in the world of ERPs. So like enterprise resource planning systems, they're big. And a lot of times there's other like point solutions that are connected to that core software. So is it probably a good idea to have like your DR plan should be able to support those third-party connections too? And, or like, what is, how do these things connect and what does that process look like?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think you're right. I mean, one is your core ERP, for which, obviously that's your core business ERP, and then you need to have a disaster recovery plan. But if you have other systems that you own, okay, not necessarily the third-party systems, which you may not own, but you may integrate, your DR exercise or the plan should include all the systems that you own that work and interact with the DR, with the ERP.
Sure.
Then you should also make sure that your third-party application providers have their own DRs, so that if there is an issue there, your business is not disrupted. And then again, your DR plan should include testing of those integrations in case of a DR, in case of a disaster at your end or at the third party end. But to answer your question, your DR plan should include your ERP and all the systems that interact with your ERP and that you own.
That makes sense. You're running a business. You've included these other applications to support, your main objectives. Like, it follows then that if you've got a plan in place for when disaster strikes, that you should be accounting for all the different, tools and software that you're using, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking a lot about now what disaster recovery is, what should be included in a plan. I'm hoping now we can maybe pivot and talk a little bit more about the process for creating a DR plan and maybe the team that's involved with, kind of managing and executing that plan when and if they need to use it. Could you talk about the process for that, Siva?
Sure. Yeah. So, to keep this discussion kind of simple, let's take a scenario where you have a Lawson installation, and your application and your databases are on the virtual machine. So in this scenario, the first thing that you would do is identify, obviously, all the systems that you own and that you host on the VM or third party, whatever the case may be, and list out all the stakeholders. So who are your technical stakeholders and who are your business stakeholders? So as an example, in this system, you would have a Windows server admin. And this person or a team, depending on the size of your organization, would actually be maintaining the VMs and the servers. Then you have database administrator or the DBA team itself. Again, depending on the size of the organization, it could be a single person or a team. In most cases, a DBA would be a different resource than a Windows administrator. Then you have the application administrators. It's the Lawson administrator who on a day-to-day basis do the installation and maintenance of the application. So those are an important stakeholder. Then the application owners. It's the business stakeholders. The people, they are the most impacted. They are the non-technical, resources, but they are the most impacted in case your Lawson system goes down or your ERP system goes down. They are needed to provide inputs as to how long they can wait to get the system back. So that's one of the parameters that you take into consideration when you plan a DR. And they are also important to do the testing when the systems are back up. So those are the people. Then your disaster recovery team would have a project manager. And this person would be responsible for bringing all the stakeholders together, planning the meeting, documenting the steps needed in the DR plan. And eventually, this person would lead the DR testing also. And apart from that, then you have the IT head or the sponsor of the DR project itself. It could be an IT director, or it could even be a CIO. However, depending on the size of the organizations. So that's how you basically start talking about this, set up a team. Then that it doesn't end there. So once the team comes and meets, they basically have to know each stakeholder will be providing their steps that are needed to bring a system back in case of a disaster. And this should be documented and the stakeholders clearly identified. Their backups should also be identified, because a particular stakeholder could be either out of office or busy with other things. So you need to see who are the stakeholders, who can be reached in case of a disaster, and their backups as well. Okay. Apart from these steps, you should also have details on who can declare a disaster. So not everyone can just say, hey, if a particular feature of the application is not working, you don't call a disaster.
Oh, that's a great point, actually.
Yeah, right. I mean, oh my God, I know I tried to save something and my entry did not save. I don't call it a disaster. Okay, it's actually a bug in the application, right?
Yeah.
So there are protocols to identify what a disaster is and who or which individual or a set of people can call a disaster. So that's also important. So those things are documented, and then that's tested. But there are a couple of parameters that I want to kind of identify that are very important. Those are recovery time objective and recovery point objective. So there are two critical parameters. One is the recovery time objective, as the name states. It's the time that the system can be down before which the disaster should be recovered. For some business, it has to be near real time, but in other cases, if there is a disaster, you may be able to wait for a few hours, maybe even a couple of days. So that is an important parameter that needs to be considered when you actually plan a DR. Depending on that, you will need to plan for the infrastructure, whether it's a cold DR or a warm DR or a hot DR. Okay, and then there is a cost implication associated to that. The second parameter is the recovery point objective. This is how, basically, in simple words, this is how frequently you should be taking backups of your data. Okay, how much data is okay to be lost in case of a disaster. For example, if you are taking backups on a nightly basis, so you took your backup at 1 a.m. yesterday and your disaster strikes at 2 p.m., that means any data entered between that time will be lost because you have the backup going back, right? So again, that's something that is discussed with the stakeholders. If they say, hey, that's not acceptable, then it may be even a few minutes. You may be taking backups every few minutes, or it could be a mirror database, depending on your requirements. In short, it's just not taking database backups. It is just a step in the whole disaster recovery planning. So
yeah, you mentioned some really great points there, and a lot of things to consider too. And it sounds like depending on the type of organization you're running, there's probably some compliance requirements there too, where like you can't be down for more than X amount of time, and your whatever like policy or practice you have in place for ensuring that any data that's lost is like, how are you going to address that? That's missing data. It sounds like it could be pretty catastrophic there quickly.
That is correct. Yeah, I mean, data is nowadays the main thing, right? And you have to be up as soon as possible, and those are the parameters you need to consider.
So throughout all this, we've been talking a lot about testing, and I think it's an important component of this DR plan, because like if you don't, it's one thing to document your plan and appoint a team and have people processes in place, but it's another thing to actually run a fire drill and see how things go and see how quickly you can operate. And so how would you go about defining that testing process? What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you for raising it. Yes, this is, I think, one of the most important steps that I would stress. Without this, your DR planning is actually incomplete. Okay, so once you have a DR plan, it's important to put this plan to test. okay, and make sure that all the kinks are removed. No, it works fine. Okay, till you do a DR test, it is just on paper. Okay, so a DR testing or a fire drill is a mock drill, which mimics a DR situation. Okay, this is a planned one, and you basically bring all the stakeholders, okay, and run through all the steps that are in your DR plan. Take notes. The first time, you're probably going to find issues in your steps. Maybe there are steps that are missing.
Sure.
Maybe there are steps that didn't have the dependencies listed out. Maybe you tried reaching out to some stakeholders, you couldn't. Right? This is a learning opportunity for you. Okay, and you take notes, you meet, do a lessons learned review, and fix the DR plan. And you rinse and repeat till you have a working plan. So that's key. Okay. This step, I keep talking about this step a lot with my clients because this is a step I've seen gets neglected, or people, once they meet and have a DR plan, they kind of assume that this will work. But we have seen in many DR drills that there are steps missing, or no, there is an opportunity to improve. Another important reason why you do this is once you have a working DR plan, when you do a DR test exercise, you time it. When you time it, you know how long it's going to take for you to bring the systems back up in case of a disaster. That is like a baseline. That way you know if the systems go down for real in the future, you can say more predictably when they will be back up, right? Sometimes if you don't test it out, you would not know how long these steps take. In real, they may look very simple on paper, but when you may end up spending a lot of time in it, and you may end up seeing issues as you do it. So what I would say is, let's never skip this step, okay? And this should happen at regular intervals of time, okay, in any organization. So I would end this question with saying, if you sweat more in peace, then you bleed less in war. So that's my philosophy.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. You had one sentence to summarize what we're talking about here. It's that line. I feel like that really captures it. So thanks for that. And you talked about testing, and even like just taking the time to really like get your recovery response like process to the place you want it is gonna I think save you in the end. When you look at that CrowdStrike incident, they're calling it one of the biggest outages in history, and over 8.5 million systems crashed. They estimate over $10 billion. It's like they had a plan in place, but whatever happened, like I guess they didn't account for it. They could have tested more or had more, maybe more checkpoints along the way to kind of like continuously work at that plan, because it's not a set it and forget it type activity. It sounds like it's something that really needs to be prioritized, like ongoing. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So any releases that's done, obviously, there are release plannings and whatnot. In spite of all the great systems that we have, checks and balances, you still had that.
Yeah.
Right. So just imagine not having any plan, and you have issues, and I can definitely give examples as we talk. You would have you would basically be starting from scratch. So those kinds of incidents are wake up calls for all of us. If you don't have one, you have to start thinking about the DR steps and whatnot.
That's such a great point you mentioned there too. It's like they say that the CrowdStrike incident, it was fixed within hours, which is pretty quick. But like, because a lot of these things needed to be fixed manually, like the trickle down effect, and you're mentioning like if you don't have any plan in place, like those statistics I mentioned earlier with the millions of computers outage and the $1 billion in lost funds, it's like that could have been so much
Far
worse
worse.
if
Yep.
there was nothing in place. So like it really hits home and demonstrates the point that like you
That's
need
correct.
to have something in place and you need to be working at it all the time. So we talked about that. I'm wondering now, in your experience being a technical consultant and all these, roles you've had throughout your career, is there anything you can share from the road of consulting?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I've seen in my career more than once issues where that we have faced when DR plans have not been in place. I'll share with you a couple of incidents, without going into details. We had a Lawson client on-prem. They were on Lawson for many years. Okay, they were owning the servers. Those were physical servers. They used to take backups of their data in tape. Okay, this is many years back.
Yeah.
And they thought they were all set. Okay, but as I said, DR planning is just not taking backups. It's actually testing, your process of recovery end to end to make sure they work. So unfortunately, there was a hardware issue on their production database server, and they went down, and they could not fix the hardware, issue, and they couldn't even recover the tapes that they had back onto another database. So the whole process of recovering data from the tape was never tested. Did they have the backup? Yes, that's checked. But did they test it out? And this is a real story, and they were actually down for weeks. And they lost a lot of data also. This is one example. Another incident, that client was on a third party hosting, and they had multiple servers and whatnot, but they did not have a DR plan. Again, backups were being taken regularly, but since they did not have a DR plan, when the hosting provider had an outage, again it was a hardware, I think it was a network issue. Again, they took few days to recover. Then there was a hardware failure. So basically, multiple things went wrong. They were production down for a few days because again we didn't have a plan which was tested and or even listed out anything on paper. So
your disaster recovery plan is more than taking backups.
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, that's. I shouldn't laugh because people had to learn the hard way here. But man, in today's, with all the software and tools and resources available now for kind of making sure that there's a fail-safe in place, you would just hate to be in a situation like that where like all you had was backups and they don't even work. It sounds like that first story you had there, that the backup didn't even do what it needed to.
Correct. I mean, they had the backup, but they didn't have a means to restore it back.
I see.
And I mean, the sad thing is, I was the applications guy, and I could do nothing because it was a hardware failure. Okay, and they had to go to the vendor to get a different piece of hardware which was not available. The whole stress was on the applications and the database team, wherein they did not contribute to it, but we were trying to help. But we couldn't really do anything without, a working, backup.
Yeah.
So that was sad. It was all quite stressful for the stakeholders as well as for the other IT people, who were involved.
Got it. Okay. Well, hey, listen, we're getting close to time here, so I want to thank you again for all the great insights you shared so far. Before we wrap up, I like to ask my guests if you could offer today's audience one piece of advice regarding today's topic. So for us, that's disaster recovery. What would be your one actionable takeaway for them?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think one takeaway for everyone, regardless of where you are in the organization, in the hierarchy, is if you're a stakeholder in an application or multiple applications, check if that application and the dependent systems have a DR plan in place.
Yeah.
Okay. Find where it is. Check when was it revised last. Okay. And if there was a DR test done, if yes, when was the last time it was done? If it was more than 1 year, then you are you need one DR testing exercise. And you raise it as a red flag to your management, to your manager, whosoever needs to know that this is a big risk to the organization or for the applications that you are a stakeholder in. That is one. The second one is that's the one. That's where you start basically. So
okay.
Yeah.
You got something else you want to share there? I haven't had two takeaways, but if you've got something that you just got to get out there, I encourage you to share it.
Yes, I would say if you see, and I would say go ahead and recommend a DR plan at least once a year.
Okay.
If nothing has changed. But if things are changing, like if your application topology is changing, if you're making changes to your integrations, adding additional applications in your application suite, or if there is a major change in your IT stakeholders or non-IT stakeholders, that also warrants a DR testing exercise, because you need new people to learn the steps. And also, if there is a change in the application topology, your DR plan needs to keep up. So that's my second takeaway. But the first one is where you start, and that's the critical one.
Yeah, no, I thank you for sharing that. You don't know what's going on unless you look under the hood, and once you do, you need to take steps towards improving your recovery plan there. And RPI Consultants assists with developing recovery plans. Yeah, is that something you've helped with here?
Yes, we can definitely help clients who are say if you're on Lawson, on-prem, or hosted by a third party. We can definitely help you come up with a DR plan if you don't have one. We can work with your PMs to identify your stakeholders, like the DBAs and your server administrators, the third-party hosting providers. If we can work with all of them, come up with a plan. We can also help lead the DR testing exercise.
Awesome.
But if you already have a plan and a team, we can also come in as just the application. From an application point of view, to kind of fill in that gap if you have.
Awesome. Thanks for providing some insight there. And for those of you listening in, if you need help with disaster recovery, we encourage you to reach out. Thanks again for tuning in today. If you have questions about today's segment or Cloud Suite or disaster recovery, please email us at podcast@rpic.com. Again, that's podcast@rpic.com. This is RPI Tech Connect, and I'm your host, Chris Airy. We'll see you next time.